Welcome to Leadership Reimagined, where game-changing conversations are reshaping the world of work. I'm Janice Ellig, the CEO and founder of Ellig Group, Executive Search Advisors, where we are reimagining search through our long-standing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. On today's topic, data solutions for better corporate governance, I am delighted to welcome David Chun, the CEO and founder of Equilar, one of the most trusted names in corporate governance today, providing corporate leadership data solutions. Companies of all sizes rely on Equilar, including 70% of the Fortune 500, for their suite of industry-leading educational products, research, and thought leadership. Recognized as one of the 100 most influential players in corporate governance by the National Association of Corporate Directors, the Disruptor Award by 2020 Women on Boards, and Outstanding 50 Asian Americans in Business, David is a true game changer. An avid board contributor, founding member, and advisor to multiple organizations, including Ellig Group, he is a master at corporate governance. David, it's a privilege to leverage your insights today, and I'm delighted to have you join us for the conversation.
Thank you, Janice. It's truly an honor and pleasure to be here. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast.
We are delighted as well. And so I always like to start with the background. What led you to where you are today? What were those drivers that got you to found this company?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start pretty much at the beginning. I grew up in New Jersey, right outside of New York. We were an immigrant family from Korea. Our ticket out of Korea was my dad's ability to go get a scholarship at Fairleigh Dickinson University to get his MBA there. And so I grew up in New Jersey, did my undergrad at the University of Virginia, worked in strategy consulting at Bain in Boston, short stint at a software company, then got my MBA, then spent 6 years on Wall Street with Donaldson, Lefkin, and Jenrette. A great firm, no longer exists, as we all know. They got acquired by Credit Suisse. But that was probably the most influential experience in terms of sort of what's gotten me to where I am today for a whole host of reasons. But I think starts with understanding the data and sort of where did I get that experience? And as an investment banker for 6 years, I spent a lot of time, more than I would care to imagine, in terms of spending time going through SEC filings, but also recognizing the wealth of data that was there. And that's what inspired me to go out and start Equilar in the spring of 2000 to mine this data. And somehow we stumbled into this whole corporate governance area, literally as Enron and Anderson were going out of business, sadly. And that I would point to as being the start of the modern era of corporate governance. As we all know, Sarbanes-Oxley came out of that. And, there was a lot of focus around executive compensation. And that's where it all started. And we have carved out an interesting niche and working with, corporate America, the institutional investor community, the media, academics. Compensation for a whole host of reasons is an important part of the corporate governance dynamic. And that's what really started Equilar. And we've been able to continue to grow Equilar and build other solutions. As you know, Janice, you've been an amazing partner around board diversity. So while collecting the compensation data, we built a people database. And so now we have a digital solution, as you know, today, that you and your firm also take advantage of, and as in supporting.
We love it.
Thank you, thank you, in supporting your clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
And working with the Women's Forum of New York, as you know, you and Maggie and others have done an amazing job of honoring companies who are doing the right thing, who are very thoughtful and intentional about it. And I just am honored and feel very fortunate and blessed that I'm in a position where we are today to work with people like you as part of all this.
Well, and you've been there supporting the Breakfast of Corporate Champions, honoring those companies above the national average of the S&P 500. Maggie Wilderotter has been, co-chair with me and others. From your background in banking and consulting, you saw a void, you saw a gap, right, about how this information can come together to improve corporate governance. So what was it like during those early years as a startup and a founder of this startup?
In one word, it was tough. And let me explain why. I left in March of 2000. NASDAQ was, just broke through 5,000. I'm out here in Silicon Valley. It's the land of milk and honey. And then quickly within a couple of weeks, the market started to soften and frankly crater. So we had raised a small amount of capital, about $1 million through friends and family, and but with the intention of going out and raising additional capital. But that market just, as we all know, completely shut down. And so for the first couple of years, I mean, we had to be very creative, entrepreneurial, and somehow we pulled a rabbit out of the hat. We were able to find an interesting niche around compensation. And our first break actually was with Reuters. I distinctly remember this email exchange with the reporter Tim McLaughlin. He was covering Tyco, needed to know what the CFO at the time, Mark Schwartz, what he made in 2001. And we were able to provide that information to him, and that helped put us on the map. And so, yeah, I mean, it was to help put this in perspective, man, those first 3 years, I was not taking any salary at all, zero. And, going from investment banking to a startup that, you weren't making any money. I had this conversation with my accountant. He's like, I've never had anybody in your situation that went from where you were in one bracket to getting the earned income tax credit. Like, what is that? Like, I didn't know what that was. So it was a very, very humbling experience, because there were many, many days where it's just, I kept waking up like, am I crazy? Like, what am I doing here? But I also recognized that there was the opportunity. There were some, green shoots that said, hey, they wouldn't be calling us back, or they wouldn't engage with us if they didn't think what we were doing was meaningful. And so thankfully, we were able to get to a point where we were a sustainable business and we're generating enough revenue to cover our costs, and eventually to be able to take a salary coming out of it. But yeah, those first couple of years were, like I said, if I had to pick one word, it was tough, very, very challenging.
Well, you started in 2000, and I started the same in search in 2000.
Yep.
Albeit a little bit different, but it's true. If you're like a founder and start in a startup situation, you have to be prepared to weather it, and obviously believe so much in what you were doing, and you did, and so you had that compensation piece. But let's fast forward 20 years. Today, the products and services you're providing to those 70% of the Fortune 500, how are the companies using Equilar's solutions, information, besides compensation of board members and CEOs?
When we started collecting the data, literally in spring of 2000, we got, the compensation data, but we were also tracking, obviously, which executive and board members were receiving compensation. And we made a very conscious decision from day one when, a Tim Cook shows up at Apple and then a Tim Cook shows up at Nike. We wanted to make sure that we captured it in a way where it was the same Tim Cook. So it was a little extra effort to do that. But what it has allowed us to do is build to build out the base, the foundation of a pretty exciting executive board relationship database. And so while collecting the data, let's say Tim Cook at Apple in, let's say 2005 or 2010, we were also identifying, well, who else was with Tim Cook at Apple, during his tenure, during those years. And so we've built out a database of about 1.5 million executives and board members, individuals that they've interacted with, where they've overlapped. And as you know, what are some interesting applications around that? So one is clearly around recruiting. And so we're excited when companies say they cannot find candidates. My response is, do you have 10 seconds? And, we can quickly go in and, show them like, here are candidates. But even better, not only getting a list of profiles who could potentially, fit the criteria, but equally, if not more important, is like, how are you connected to these individuals? How could you potentially get to these individuals through a warm introduction, through your trusted network? How are you able to identify people in your network who could also serve as a reference for you for when trying to do some background checking on individuals? So that's a pretty unique aspect of what we've built out. First use cases around recruiting, executive and board recruiting. But frankly, the bigger opportunity is helping on the sales and business development side. So in addition to working with B2B sales organizations, we're working with private equity firms and others. And, I like to say we're solving that last mile. How do we get, we every day, right? We see emails. We're trying to get to this individual or person or company. who in our network knows this person? How do we get to that individual? And inevitably, with what we've built out with our data and I'll say our full tech stack, where we can integrate email activity data and other signals to help people connect to individuals and companies, and frankly, help accelerate business. And that's something we're very excited about.
And you have been such an advocate of connecting people. You're doing it through Equilar. You also do it through forums. I've participated in several that you've held because you believe in making the world a smaller place by connecting people. And you've said, as an Asian American immigrant, you talk about the importance of this and to strengthen those connections. Really, this leads right into what good corporate governance is all about, right? So that people expand or open the aperture of who's out there for their board or a sales opportunity or something, an alliance, correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, going back to, your original question, sort of talk about your journey. I mean, our family, we came from Korea in 1968. First ones in our family to be in the United States. So we didn't have any cousins. We didn't have any uncles or aunts. We didn't have any, candidly, my parents didn't have any friends. I mean, I think back to them like, oh my God, how did they do this? And then, fast forward 54, 55 years later, and I'm on this podcast with you. And I look at the other people you've had on podcasts here, right? Alex Gorski, Julie Sweet, and the list goes on. And I'm like, well, how, talking heads, how did I get here? And so much of it has been, people along the journey that have paid it forward for me, that have opened up doors, that have people who've been very generous with their time and their resources to help connect me with others. And so that's where I'm excited, where that I've done it in an analog world, right? Where friends have been able to do that, but are there ways? And there are ways, and that's what we built out is really taking all the data that's out there and recognize like, oh, so-and-so who I'm really good friends with, who I just had coffee with, actually knows somebody that we're trying to get to, and comfortable enough to ask the person for an introduction. And that's something that we're very excited in terms of helping accelerate things.
It's really all about the network and being part of that network. And, for years, women and underrepresented groups have not been. And so that's part of corporate governance priorities today, but, in terms of having more diverse boards. So over the past 2 decades, how have you seen corporate governance priorities and practices evolve? What have been some of those changes?
Without question, boards are taken a lot more seriously. You pull, SEC filings from, 2000, and, just here's one example. The CEO of Broadcom, I think it was Greg Reyes. And if you pull up the proxy from 2000, and if you look at like his option grants he was getting that year, I mean, it was like the Black-Scholes value of the grants were, I don't know, $400 or $500 million. There was like 3 separate grants, and each grant was because the stock price was continuing to go down, and they kept on granting more equity. You don't see that anymore. Yeah, and you definitely see, sadly for that individual, as some of you may recall, he ended up going to jail for option backdating issues. So right. Without question, boards are taking their responsibility so much more seriously than what had happened when I first joined, when I first started Equilar. And on the diversity front, you get calls, I'm sure all your searches, right? We'd like to have a diverse candidate, or virtually all of your searches. And, I'm often being asked, hey, we're looking for somebody who can meet this criteria. And, I'm doing my best. I'm fortunate enough that through, our work with you and others, and, with all the great work that Glenn Gomez has done in building out the Equilar Diversity Network, we're working with 50 different diverse organizations, 50 organizations to help advance board diversity, that I'm fortunate enough that we happen to interact with a lot of diverse candidates along the way. So I think, whether it's on compensation, whether it's around board diversity, a whole host of ESG related matters, without question, boards are taking it much more seriously and asking for the data and looking for resources to help.
Right. And while diversity is important, it's so important for them to always select the best candidate for the C-suite in the boardroom. That goes without saying. So I want to just take a quick moment to remind our audience that you are listening to Data Solutions for Better Corporate Governance with David Chun, founder and CEO of Equilar. The topics we cover, like today's, are all current, and a new topic with a new game changer is released every month. This is a great way to stay current on relevant issues happening around us. Now let's return to David. So David, there was a recent study that Equilar did referencing significant growth of women in the Russell 3000 executive roles from 2010 to 2020. However, the report noted that most of these positions were senior staff roles, such as CHRO, Chief Administrative Officer, General Counsel, just to name a few. So where were the P&L responsibility roles? Who was holding those? And is that a concern for women? And should it be a concern for all of us in terms of gaining seats in the C-suite, which then ultimately gets them into the boardroom?
Absolutely. You look at, let's start with the CEO. Most CEOs, they've come through, as general manager of the unit, chief revenue officer, something that's more, growth oriented. And, and as we all know, most CEOs will have a board seat. So I think it's critical as we look at, we've made tremendous progress so far, but I think there's also an opportunity to recognize how do we get more women in, with P&L responsibility that are focused on the growth of the business, because that's ultimately the more likely the path into a CEO role.
So this is important information that boards need to pay attention to, correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. As they look at CEO succession planning, right, is looking at, okay, who are the unfortunate conversation of if the CEO were to get hit by a bus or get into an accident. The candidates and, making sure that pipeline, that's probably that is the number one responsibility of the board, right? Is the CEO, the compensation of the CEO, because really if you think about the governance issues that companies have had over time, it's often driven by, not having the right CEO in the role, and that ripples through whether it's culture, whether that's executive, CEO succession planning and whatnot. So that's an important part of the board's responsibility, looking at that next level of who could potentially fill that CEO spot.
Right, and so the importance of boards in terms of looking at succession planning, right? Because you're right. The number one responsibility is the CEO. Do we have the right CEO? If not, we have to hire the right CEO. We may have to let go of the current CEO.
Yep.
And then what's the management team look like? And so what are you hearing conversations around boardroom tables or from your colleagues that you're working with in terms of the board's priority in looking at that bench strength for the CEO, and that there are a number of individuals being groomed for that? Because you have to sit in a lot of seats before you go into the CEO seat.
There have been numerous studies, and Janice, I'm sure you're experienced being involved with search. The organ rejection rate of bringing in somebody from the outside, right? It typically half of outside CEOs don't even make it past a year or two.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
mm-hmm.
the other issue that you think about this, right? We've looked at, so related to this is the pay of CEOs, right? An internal promotion versus an external hire. And, an internal promotion, the person who's right below the CEO, that gets the CEO role, he or she's very happy to get promoted. And, obviously we'll get a raise as part of it, but it's typically, a relatively modest increase from before. The minute you need to go outside, that changes. And so you bring in an outside CEO in. Okay, so that person's brought in, and for better or for worse, as we know in this world, this information is now publicly available. And so if you think about all the folks internally who did not get that role, and then they see the pay package of bringing somebody in from the outside, then the board's scrambling, right, to retain the key executive talent to continue that knows how to run the business, right? And so you have this ripple effect of what ends up happening if that CEO succession decision isn't handled properly. And so those are things that boards need to be very careful about.
One of the podcasts I did was with Tricia Griffith of Progressive Insurance, and she talked about how her CEO groomed her and others for the CEO role over years. And she was in all sorts of roles, P&L and functional, leading HR, which gave her a great appreciation for culture. And, that was very intentional. The same thing with Hubert Joly. I did a podcast with him when he was preparing Corey Berry. But you have to be intentional, and a board has to pay attention to who's being groomed.
Yeah.
For a short term, something happens to the CEO, or the longer term, is stepping down.
Yeah, and Trisha's got an amazing story. I mean, she started in the trenches, right? And so
Yes.
she literally saw it from,
Yes.
has seen all parts of that business.
Yes. So what are you seeing in terms of your own best practices? What are you doing internally at Equilar that you would share with our audience?
I'm always a big fan of, let's challenge people, help people grow into the role. And so it's been exciting to see, people, seeing their careers grow here and taking on increased responsibility, seeing people like Courtney on a research team and a couple of his members where their research is getting published on blogs or picked up and are getting quoted in major media publications, all the great work that Belen's been doing around the diversity network. I could spend the whole podcast going through each person, so my apologies in advance that I can't highlight others, but it's great to see the work that they're doing and also being recognized externally.
That's great. And you recently announced a partnership with Intap, a huge cloud software solutions company geared towards financial services. So what's the value add in this partnership and for your clients as well?
Yeah. So getting back to the database that we've built around executives and board members, as I mentioned, recruiting is an important part of what we're doing, but the other aspect of how people could use the data set is around business development, getting back to solving that last mile. How do we connect to an executive or board member? And within Intap, they have a product called Deal Cloud. And Deal Cloud is the leading CRM for private equity. So if you talk to some of your private equity clients and you ask them, well, how are we tracking deals? More often than not, it will be Deal Cloud. And it's the Carlyle's of the world and others. And if you think about a CRM, so even if you're using Salesforce, and we do also have a Salesforce app, the biggest challenge around any CRM, right, it's only as good as the data that goes into it. And if you think about a CRM, the data, that's the fuel. That's the gasoline for the engine. And if you put dirty gasoline in an engine, it's not going to run. And the challenge, let's say your business, Janice, right? If you think about some of the individuals you just mentioned, right? They're the CEO of a company, but they're also on the board of another company, right? And most CRMs, like 99% of CRMs that are out there today, will treat those as separate records. Like, okay, we have one Julie suite here, we have another Julie suite over there. What we do is we unify all of that, and that's what we're doing with Deal Cloud and with Salesforce and others. And so that allows them, our users, are the users of these tools, to effectively figure out, okay, how do we take advantage of our network? Who do we know in our ecosystem to be able to, connect to an individual, to be able to recruit somebody, to be able to form a partnership with somebody? And so that's what we're excited about, is taking our data to really help accelerate business.
That's terrific. And I know it's going to help us in the search business as well. So we've discussed, the evolution of boards a little bit in your business over the past 20 years. What do you see going forward for corporate boards, their needs over the next 5, 10, dare I say even 20 years going forward? David, if you can look in your crystal ball, what do you see for corporate boards and their evolution? What's going to happen?
Thinking forward here, I mean, there's going to be a greater appetite for data. And there's going to be, frankly, greater pressure on boards in terms of performance and accountability and whatnot. And we look at the rise of activists over the last 15, 20 years, and they're not going away. And we're seeing everything around ESG, around diversity, around pay equity. It's at some point. Honestly, I don't know. Does the board become almost a full-time job? But the list of things that are being added to their plate, it's not getting shorter, right? And but no, I think that the expectations will just continue to increase. Boards will continue to get more diverse. In our latest gender diversity index, what we did see was, about a year ago, is roughly 50-50 new board appointments, women versus men. It's actually inched down a bit. So it's about 40-60 now, women versus men. So that momentum that had picked up over the last couple of years has slightly turned in the other direction. Whether that continues in that direction or comes back, we'll see. But I think, things that we've seen here, for example, SB 826 being blocked here in California, but now, trying to there's talk to get that back in place. Senator Jackson and others working on that. So, I think boards will get more diverse. It's just a question how quickly that rate of change will occur.
And you mentioned the amount of time that boards are spending today, directors, and that will probably increase with more data being in front of them and more crises, actually, right? And not just black swans, but gray rhinos, things that, they have to pay attention to. Might the number of boards be also something that is decreased in terms of the number that different regulators will say people should be on, the number of boards?
You have the proxy advisors, the ISS and Glass Lewis's, kind of drawing a hard line on some of this stuff. That's those numbers are typically limited to public boards without any focus on private boards. I think there's going to be realistically expectations in terms, like you said, with more crises, just the expectations of board members, it's only going to increase. It's not going down. So then the question then becomes bandwidth wise, or are there better tools on helping boards to be able to get their arms around some of these issues and not be as labor intensive as they are today.
David, this has been such a rich discussion. Thank you very much. But do you have any parting words for those of us listening and who are on boards and what they need to maybe pay attention to even more?
Yeah, I would say, the board journey, it's a continuing, it's an evolving process. You need to stay on top of latest developments. We just had a couple of months ago, the focus on the new pay versus performance guidelines. So, you just need to want to continue to learn and, take advantage of resources that are out there. And, I think one thing with boards, it's turned more into a compliance exercise and less so a strategic exercise. So I think it's important that boards take a step back and recognize, okay, the reason we're on this board is not only to, obviously handle the regulatory issues and requirements, but more importantly, how do we help, make sure they carve out enough time to focus on the strategic issues to whether, to grow the company as an independent entity, whether M&A is part of that, whether they should be selling out to somebody else, and to not get too wrapped up in the compliance aspects of it.
Oh, I think that's such an important point. And I just did an interview with Maggie Wilderotter, who's on a number of boards, as you know, and we did this for directors and boards. And one of the things she spoke to was, given the pandemic and company stocks plummeted, they really had to pivot. And it was important to be agile and pivot on the strategy, because one strategy of yesterday is not going to work for tomorrow. And that's what you're saying. Yeah,
exactly. If you think about Maggie's boards, you think about Lyft, right? People weren't taking rides. And so they had to quickly figure out, to get into the delivery business. Costco, right? They had to figure out, okay, we're now becoming almost an essential service, right? In terms of helping things out. So loved hearing Maggie talk about that in the past.
Yeah, so strategy is such an important part of the board's responsibility. So David, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. And, data solutions for better corporate governance, it's just going to increase. So I wish you all the best in continuing to grow your business. And of course, we're going to continue to use Equilar as we do our searches for boards and C-suite. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Janice. Really appreciate the opportunity.
And to our audience, thank you for tuning in for another game-changing conversation on Leadership Reimagined. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or visit our website at elligroup.com. Thank you for joining us today.